Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm Drew Stephen. I'm a professor at UTSA and hosting this meeting. And just to explain the kind of odd setup, when we were looking at dates, I realized that this corresponded with the Music Biz Day that my colleague runs every year. And I was looking at setting this up at our main campus, and he had rooms and food and interesting sessions and more food and a lot of things. Plus, he said he would cover any costs and set up all the technology and stuff, and that just made so much sense. So even though this may be an odd thing, I think it's a really good thing that we can share this with him. So a couple of things that'll happen today. So we have our sessions this morning at 10. So when we break at 11, there will be a drum circle that's set up. It was supposed to be outside, but because of the rain, it will be in that indoor room. And then the one Music Biz Day session that I thought really made sense for us at 11:40, they're going to do a Roots of San Antonio panel where they're going to be talking. He's brought in some really great speakers for that. So most of our stuff will be here, but if we want to go down to the La Vita room, which is just across from the main entrance at 11:40, that'll make sense. And I've also asked the chair of our department, who's she's busy doing stuff with them, but she'll come at 12:40 to say hello to us too. The other thing for lunch, because there are a lot of them, I went over to Pico de Gallo, which is right across the street. They normally don't do reservations until 5 o'clock, but they've put aside some space with us. They've set up a fixed price menu for $16 that includes tip and tax and everything. So if you want to fill out a form, I can take that over to them at the break and just make sure they're ready for us. And they've said that they will get us in and out in the hour. So I think that was rather than trying to find something else around here, and especially if there are more people who are doing things. So I think that's it for me, and so we can start our first session now.
So let me thank Drew for organizing everything, and this is wonderful, and coordinating this with Music Biz Day. It's very nice. So let me address our viewers online right now. You can download our program from our chapter website at AMS-SW.org. So you can follow the program. We will only live stream the AMS paper sessions, so not the Music Biz sessions. So whatever is in this room, the Al Mercado room, will be live streamed, and you can post comments on the YouTube live chat. I've not tried it, but it's supposed to work. So if not, email me. Anyways, I will chair this first session, and I will not read the bios because they're printed in the program. But I will welcome our first speaker, Emily Hagan from the University of North Texas. And she will talk about the musical depiction of the Cid in the operas of Monteverdi and Cavalli. So please welcome Dr. Hagan.
Thank you so much. The role of deception in early Baroque Venetian opera is, perhaps unsurprisingly, two-faced. Like the operas themselves, documentation surrounding mid-17th century opera community celebrates both truth and falsehood, and betrays a fascination with the rhetorical dimensions of these coexisting or even symbiotic forces. Existing studies of printed materials from Venetian musical culture by Ellen Rosand, Wendy Heller, Tim Carter, Lorenzo Bianconi, and others address ways that this popular topic among Venetian academies may have contributed to the genre's occasionally ambivalent moral compass. In this paper, I contend that this fascination reveals itself in the operas through librettists' character text, which in turn required composers to devise a musical language that would distinguish between characters' real emotions and false ones. Composers rose to this challenge in ways that achieved their stated goal of replicating the sonic qualities of emotional speech through music, and were also consistent with their society's views on deception. These musical observations arose during my work on a larger analytical project that aimed to isolate musical characteristics associated with specific emotions in this repertoire. this music falls chronologically in the space between the late Renaissance style and the arrival in Italy of the aesthetic ideas we now associate with the doctrine of affections. In the absence of the conventions associated with the doctrine of affections, Venetian composers were left to fend for themselves in creating operatic conventions for emotional communication. Consequently, I worked to identify musical practices that Monteverdi, Cavalli, and their contemporaries developed to meet that challenge. Through a comparative analysis of 7 representative operas, I isolated musical characteristics that appeared most frequently with lines of text calling for specific emotions. These musical parameters for affect ranged from modal preferences to melodic gestures to cadence types associated with each affect. My observations today were an additional, unexpected outcome of this larger project, and my findings correspond closely with 17th century attitudes toward deception. Documents published in Venice in the early part of the century reveal a predictably negative attitude toward lies in society at large. One such document is Cesare Ripa's Iconologia, which is an encyclopedia that reveals the symbols associated with hundreds of different abstract ideas. I will share here just 2 short entries that simultaneously condemn deception and acknowledge the power that it affords the deceiver. The first entry is inganno, or deceit. The use of symbolic animals in this entry highlights the personal gain that a lie can afford, but it also depicts the use of lies for this purpose as base or animalistic. Inganno is personified as a man dressed in gold, and from the waist down, his legs are 2 serpents' tails. He's accompanied by a leopard, as this engraving from the volume depicts. Ripa then explains each symbol, noting that the man's upper body is dressed in gold to teach us that at first sight, the deceiver shows goodness and courtesy in order to entice simpletons, the better to ensnare them. The liar shares this tactic with the leopard, who at first hides its head and shows only its tail in order to entice onlookers with the beauty of its lovely spotted coat. It then turns around suddenly to capture and devour its admirers with vicious teeth. A second entry for inganno adds that the deceiver holds in his left hand a bunch of lovely flowers from which a snake emerges, repeating the warning that lies conceal danger within an outer covering of beauty. Yet in 17th century Venice, a contrasting view of deceit coexisted with this rather traditional condemnation. For members of the Accademia degli Incogniti, the academy most closely associated with the city's for-profit opera ventures, simulation, or la finzione, was useful for revealing hidden truths. Lorenzo Bianconi observes that as an intellectual and artistic tool, deception was seen as an instrument that permits one to penetrate the arcane and control the passions, whether one's own or those of others. Bianconi identifies a corresponding Baroque trope, propounding the idea that genuine truths cannot be revealed directly, but only through a metaphorical game of mirrors. These figurative mirrors distort the truth deliberately, permitting the resulting reflection to manifest a deeper, hidden truth that becomes perceptible to the viewer only through the lens of illusion. This is an important part of the Venetian libertine culture, and it's best embodied in Torquato Accetto's 1641 treatise della dissimulazione onesta, or on honest deception. Accetto's treatise is based on the premise that, in his words, in this life, it is not always best for one's heart to be perfectly transparent. He does warn readers to be judicious in applying the skills that he teaches, and not to make them a way of life. He notes that one who wears a mask every day will be the most conspicuous person imaginable, exciting the curiosity of everyone. But the excellent dissimulator, of which there have been and still are many, is invisible to all. Accetto then observes that a temperate person, one whose humors are perfectly balanced and whose emotions are consequently in equilibrium, is best able to deceive. when an emotion seizes such persons, they are able to control their reactions and are not in danger of reaching emotional extremes. In Accetto's words, they will be able, in a tempest of the heart, to maintain a completely serene countenance, or when in a state of calm, to appear troubled if the occasion calls for such. Accetto gives these skills specific names: simulazione, the hiding of feelings that exist, and dissimulazione, the outward feigning of feelings that do not exist. Ripa also has an entry for the word simulazione, or feigning, and he echoes Accetto by referencing the joint power of words and gestures to communicate the thoughts that are hidden in the core of one's very being, or, for insidious reasons, to conceal them. For Ripa, feigning is to hide what is in one's very heart and soul through duplicity in one's words and in one's gestures. This skill was and is fundamental to the singer-actor's art, which is itself a socially condoned form of artistic deception. But Ripa and Accetto also acknowledge it as a practical skill for everyday people. I turn now from views on deception in the society surrounding these operas to the sounds of deception in the operas themselves. While analyzing scenes for their emotional content, I carefully took note of situations in which the emotion the character expresses is not genuine. Subsequent examination revealed a musical practice of dissimulazione that parallels the leopard's hunting tactics. When characters are called upon to lie, composers manipulated their own musical codes of affect, particularly in their choice of cadential types and melodic gestures, to clothe deceitful text in the garments of a corresponding false affect. Furthermore, the completeness of the composer's affective disguise indicates the character's skill in lying. Expert deceivers receive music that uses affective conventions well to feign the emotional state they wish to communicate. Less skilled liars might declaim suitably persuasive words, but their music fails to conceal their true underlying emotional states when they deliver these lines. The music thus offers a subtext from the composer, communicating the liar's skill, serving as an analog for the visual gestures and facial expressions that define the difference between a good and a bad liar for Ripa and Accetto. One expert fibber is Leomede, captain of the guard in Aureli and Francesco Lucio's 1658 opera, Il Medoro. In Act 2, Scene 17, Leomede seeks to trick the queen into believing that a letter he bears but refuses to show her is evidence that her beloved has taken her friend Auristella as a mistress. Leomede informs the audience of his intentions through a rather cheeky aside, then turning to the queen, instantly takes on a musical style associated with sadness to match the apologetic tone of his words. There are two musical figures associated with sadness here. The melodic shape itself frequently appears in laments. It uses a gradual ascent to a note high in the singer's range that's followed by a precipitous drop, here of a fifth, but often larger, and a continued stepwise descent. This phrase also uses a particular cadential formula associated with sadness, a vocal descent by steps from the third above the cadential note, ending in unison with the continuo, or at the octave, depending on the singer's particular range. Queen Angelica demands to know the woman's identity, and Leomede reluctantly responds, Auristella. Here he uses an added melodic flat and the same cadential formula, intensified by the use of a minor third in the descending vocal line. Angelica's heartbroken response, I feared as much in my heart, maintains his melodic E-flat, slow melodic descent, and sadness cadence. Like Ripa's serpent hidden in a bouquet, by adopting this mournful affect in his music, Leomede has concealed his dangerous lie beneath a facade of sympathy and true friendship. By successfully emulating a sorrowful passion himself, he has manipulated the passions of another to achieve his own ends. It will come as no surprise that most deceptions in early opera center on questions of love and identity. When one character seeks to deceive another in matters of love, Composers often choose musical markers associated with happiness. Many of these are present in this brief example from Act 3 of Il Medoro. In this scene, Angelica joyfully discovers that her faithful consort has returned safely from battle and rejoices in this good fortune. The markers for happiness here include prevailing stepwise motion, often with a meandering or lilting character, written out ornamental passages emphasizing ascending melodic motion and ascending sequences. An additional marker for very high intensity happiness not included here would be a sudden brief change from recitative style notated in duple meter to a triple meter section, usually lasting only through a single semantic unit in the text. Triple meter aria style as a marker for strong positive emotion also appears in scenes depicting happy love, as Tim Carter has observed. Thus, characters who claim, falsely, to love someone are most likely to be successful if their music for their false declaration of love uses these characteristics for happiness. The strongest joyful responses tend to use a particular cadential formula. In this cadence, the basso continuo resolves, rather unremarkably, by ascending fourth or more frequently by falling fifth. The voice approaches the cadence point by sounding the cadential note early over the penultimate harmony, thus sounding a fourth above the basso continuo. The voice then descends a half step, usually, to the third above the basso continuo in the final beat or portion of a beat before resolution. It then arrives simultaneously with the basso continuo on the cadential note in the following strong beat. This formula appears most consistently in dramatic situations that depict persuasion or confirmation of love. Its most famous application in a confirmation of love occurs in the love duet Pur ti miro that closes Monteverdi's L'Incoronazione di Poppea, in which it appears about a dozen times. In the hands of a skilled lyre, these associations give this cadence formula special power to convince the listener that feelings of love are genuine. Cavalli applies these persuasive techniques in Giasone, Act 1, Scene 12, in which Queen Medea attempts to convince the hero Giasone that her elderly nurse Delpha is the beautiful unknown woman who has recently been Giasone's secret lover. Her initial statement in measures 1 through 7 is a lie introducing Delpha as the lovely young bride-to-be, and her music has very few clear markers of any emotion. Beginning in measure 8, however, markers for happiness begin to appear, dressing up this lie in reassuring garments of joy. The word mira, commanding Giasone to behold Delpha's beauty, is quickly repeated, and Medea then makes a sudden, brief move to triple meter and aria style, complete with stepwise ornamental figures. However skillful her concealment of her true emotion here, this joyful passage is too little, too late. Its cadential formula, furthermore, is close to the one associated with sadness, possibly a poor match for the emotion she's attempting to project. Either Medea is not a strong liar, or more likely, on this occasion, she's not trying very hard. She fails to convince Giasone, who simply laughs. He remembers the texture of his lover's soft, youthful skin far too well. Medea, realizing that her trick has failed, reveals herself to be the secret lover. Her admission ends with a joy cadence, affirming the true happiness she feels in being reunited with her lover, occurring here on the words, I am she. This passage convinces Giasone, who responds in a style consistent with happy love, including a joy cadence of his own in the final two measures. At times, composers may communicate important aspects of plot or character development to the audience using these techniques. In Monteverdi's Incoronazione, for example, Ottone is rather a poor liar. Monteverdi clearly communicates Ottone's true feelings to the audience, even as the character attempts to conceal them. In Act 1, Scene 13, Ottone attempts to convince Drusilla that he loves her, when in fact he still loves his current wife, Poppea. As the scene begins, Ottone assures Drusilla that his love for Poppea is at an end. Drusilla is not deceived, however, and Ottone will not succeed in convincing her of the transfer of his affections until he has concealed his true feelings entirely in the music of joy. After repeatedly asking Ottone to give her a clear promise of love, Drusilla wavers, saying, "Ottone, I am not sure." In a phrase of recitative that does not contain many markers for any particular emotion, Ottone responds duplicitously, "My faithfulness could not deceive you." Drusilla asks again, "Do you love me?" This time, Ottone responds with a joy cadence, but in a recitative style, and he refuses to use the word love, replacing it with the rather weak phrase, "I long for you," or "ti bramo," prompting Drusilla to ask her question yet again with increasing insistence. Both his words and his musical content are insufficiently laden with affect for his deception to succeed. Drusilla begins to believe the lie in the following measure. Ottone repeats the same statement, "I long for you." He adds word repetition here and a brief move to triple time and another joy cadence. He repeats his triple time, "I long for you," twice more, very quickly, then returns to a recitative style to flatter her, using a longer move to triple time and a joy cadence. Occurs here. Drusilla, at last convinced, exits while singing the words, "Happily then I go on my way." After 40 measures of practice, Ottone has finally learned how to lie. We can be certain that he was deceiving Drusilla because a final solitary line spoken to himself and thus to the audience betrays his true emotion clearly in text and music. The scene closes with Ottone's confession, "I have now Drusilla's name on my lips, but Poppaea's in my heart." Using these compositional techniques, which work quite intuitively, composers in this repertoire achieved the emotional immediacy that creates an effortless connection between listener and operatic character. It is my hope that this study of the intentional misuse of these musical codes for affect might lead to new observations on the composers and the ways that they achieved the naturalness in textual and musical affect that was paramount in the development of early opera, and thus contribute to more emotionally complex interpretations and performances. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. For our viewers online, I want to say that you can post questions on the live chat, and that's why I'm struggling to find the right window here. But let's open it up to questions. So please. Yes.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this. I'm going to ask you to go back a little bit and just reiterate what you said about simulazione and dissimulazione. And so first of all, just refreshing my memory about what you said. And then, are there any sort of positive or negative qualities associated to one versus the other in terms of the cultural discussions?
Absolutely. Basing my comments entirely on these two documents, Aceto does give separate definitions for the two. The one is hiding emotions that one feels, simulazione.
Okay, gotcha.
Dissimulazione is pretending to have emotions one actually does not.
Perfect.
Ripa, however, seems to conflate both of them under the word simulazione. This doesn't surprise me. They were not working in exactly the same place, and the Ripa has been reprinted close to the time when Aceto's treatise was published. So I'm not surprised that they had related but not identical ideas there. And I did not notice a specific negative connotation for either of them. Aceto seems to respect both skills equally and consider them vital just to succeeding in social life.
Yes, thank you so much.
The questions. Yes.
I really enjoyed this. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
One of the things that I've always kind of had in the back of my mind swimming around, because this is not my area at all, is the importance of echo. And you alluded to mirrors very briefly, and echoes as an area of, not quite lie, but where you see that this thing is not the real deal, right? So you had that one excerpt where immediately somebody takes over someone else's motive, which in some ways functions almost like echo. And I wonder if you could just talk about echo's role in this world of dissimulation.
That's interesting. There are not a lot of examples that I can think of, but there may be some actually in this repertoire, at least one. However, I don't see that being mentioned in the literature surrounding the opera, at least in the sources I've been examining, and I'd love to look into it more. In Baroque culture in general, though, I think it's a perfect parallel to draw with the mirror metaphor, yeah.
Well, we have a comment, not a question, but a comment from online, from Musicology Voyage Use. I don't know who that is, but you may.
It's a great
it says, thanks for the paper, Emily. It's been lovely hearing your work over the last few years. Other comments or suggestions? Yes, please.
So, I'm struggling to try to put this into words, but I'm trying to think about the big lie of performance in this period, and that is the castrato. Is there a rhetorical similarity in the way that the characterization is talked about relative to kind of these very specific examples of the behavior and the kind of the archetypal instance of that? Do you see any parallels? Are there echoes, to use Kevin's sort of term there?
I have been thinking about the parallels between Accetto's idea of dissimulation and hiding true feelings as creating a layered self in society. I see that as a parallel with the layered self that the singer-actor has to have. I haven't seen much, or indeed anything here specific to the castrato in that respect. However, it adds an additional layer because there is so much culture surrounding the lie of that lifestyle. So I'm sure that there is something there. I haven't seen anything about it in writing.
Well, I think you set up a really great framework, so it would be really wonderful to explore that in other dimensions.
It's a wonderful idea.
Great. So the comment was from Virginia Wheelton. She identified herself from Texas Tech University. Any other comments or suggestions? Great. Well, thank you again. Our next speaker comes from University of Central Oklahoma and also University of Oklahoma, correct? Danielle Harrington will talk about Strangers with the Same Last Name, Thematic Transformation in Jake Hagee's Chamber Opera, 3 Decembers. So welcome, Danielle Harrington.
Interview, does it show it to you as well? Oh, great. I'm just going to do a quick sound check if you don't mind.
Nope, not at all. Go
Just
for it.
better to do it now than in the middle, right?
Time is ticking.
Yes, exactly. Everyone here all right? Okay, great. Okay.
Do you want a clicker?
What's that?
Do you want a clicker?
Sure. Is that
It's a USB one.
okay? Is it going to complicate? Oh, I'm sorry.
You don't have to.
I have a fancy Mac. Thank you. All right. Recognized as a significant American opera composer, Jake Heggie garnered fame at the turn of this century with Dead Man Walking and Moby Dick. Little scholarly research exists regarding his larger works, and none addresses his lesser-known operatic output. Therefore, I shed light on Heggie's chamber opera 3 Decembers from 2008 that demonstrates his mastery of musical motives. This study investigates Heggie's compositional technique of economy of means and explores the plethora of themes inspired by the opera's 3 characters and their relatable realities. My findings reveal 12 musical themes that permeate the score. Motivated by each character's given disposition, themes organically emerge and are then transformed when reiterated. I posit that the composer's choice to transform is intrinsically tied to a character's emotional shift. Furthermore, Heggie seeks to communicate universal topics and explore the dysfunctional family. I will present selected transformation examples that investigate musical construct as well as emotional impetus. As a lesser-known and newly composed opera, my methodology for this project was quite irregular. I first encountered the work while it was being produced by Painted Sky Opera in Oklahoma City, a company I work for as a pre-show lecturer. After hearing it over and over in rehearsals, I began to codify the distinct themes orally, noticing more iterations on each listen. For the initial lecture in May 2018, I consulted with the artistic director, Dr. Rob Glaubitz, and we organized a surface-level analysis geared towards priming an audience's ears. In the months following, I fleshed out my analytical method and presented the 12 themes to the composer himself in November 2018. Mr. Heggie kindly confirmed all of the themes were present and intentionally tied to character and emotion. He mentioned, though, he hoped audiences would recognize the themes orally, but did not intend for the musical motives to overtake the listener's experience. Rather, his creative process of organic motivic transformation should provide the listener with material to latch onto, whether conscious or not. Following the composer's substantiation, I continued my analysis by cataloging the themes and detailing their transformations. In addition to that interview and my theoretical analysis, these findings derive from videos of the composer and the premiere's detailed program notes. Commissioned by Houston Grand Opera and San Francisco Opera, 3 Decembers first premiered a decade ago at HGO on February 29, 2008, and has received 24 productions internationally. The collaborators were composer Jake Heggie, playwright Terrence McNally, and librettist Gene Shear, a dream team for contemporary opera who have worked together on multiple projects over the past 20 years. After the success of Dead Man Walking in 2000, McNally gave Heggie a short play he wrote for an AIDS benefit titled Some Christmas Letters and a Couple of Phone Calls. Reading the play at a pizza parlor, Heggie recounts his first reaction saying, "It sang to me, and I started sketching musical ideas in the margin. It felt so true, honest, and right." When speaking with Heggie, he describes his writing as coming from a place of intuition. I conjecture this instinctual composing manifests in 3 Decembers. To understand the musical themes, I'll first introduce the characters. This opera follows a dysfunctional family through 3 decades of their lives, using the mother's Christmas letter as a point in time to drop in. Act 1 commences in 1986, transition music takes us to 1996 in Act 2, and it finishes in 2006 for the prologue. The mother, Madeline Mitchell, is a Broadway diva extraordinaire and mother to grown children Charlie and Bea. Their father passed away when they were young, and Madeline was gone much of their lives due to the theater, which strongly shaped their worldview and relationships with one another. Though character-specific themes are not a new notion in opera, I liken Heggie's sense of pacing to a movie. Historically, it was the lush melodies of Puccini and the leitmotifs of Wagner which paved the way for film music. 100 years later, in a piece like 3 Decembers, Heggie uses the scene's emotional context to motivate the orchestration and vocal writing, which creates pacing much like a movie, for opera anyways. When the opera was workshopped 2 months prior to the premiere, the collaborators decided it needed to be only 1 act, despite its division into 3 parts, because of the relentless pace of the music and narrative, since, as Heggie said, that's how lives actually move, hence the movie-like pace. The compositional process lasted less than 6 months, which Heggie credits could have contributed to his manner of writing. His motives emerged organically, and he contends that the themes grew out of one another, as will be apparent when looking at the father's melodies. Moreover, he calls themes his working material. Heggie said he is not interested in variations because his musical themes are responding to characters. Rather, he desires to create an emotional landscape. Interpreting modern American opera can be challenging, as the composition often lives in the realm of non-functional harmony. Heggie's way of navigating the conventional tonal territory while infusing it with illustrative colors and heavy doses of dissonance derives from his economy of means. He utilizes distinct character-driven themes and exploits rhythms and intervals. His inspirations range from the great melodists Mozart, Verdi, and Puccini to the 20th century Bernstein, Sondheim, and Menotti. Yet, Heggie compositionally stands on his own 2 feet, representing a fresh idiom in the 21st century. The Though 3 Decembers is not directly autobiographical of Hege's life, it is clear the topics of suicide and acceptance of sexual orientation connect him with the opera's characters. Hege stated that the emotional theme of identity manifests in all of his output. The story of 3 Decembers revolves around identity as a member of the family one is born into and within the ones we create, the truth of who we are and who our parents are. Able to connect to the play's characters, Hege lost his father to suicide at a young age. Additionally, Charlie is struggling for approval from his mother for his gay lifestyle. A coincidence draws the connection further. Charlie's partner's name in the original McNally play is Bert, while Hege's real-life partner's name is Kurt. Hege makes a moment of this name likeness in the conversation where Maddie calls Bert Kurt in her letter. Furthermore, Hege dedicated the opera to Kurt. However, beyond being able to empathize and throwing in a bit of personal humor, Hege believes in telling universal stories. He probes the questions that surround the innate dysfunction of the family unit as it evolves and the children become adults. When talking with Hege, he said that essentially many families become strangers with the same last name. And he wonders about our responsibility to the family, now strangers, and explores how we are connected and disconnected at the same time. From the onset, the characters tend to seem like archetypes, but Hege seeks to find the depth through musical means. Diving into the formal analysis, here are the 12 themes I identify that are all throughout the score. To survey these today, I will touch on one of Madeline's themes, all 3 of the sub-themes within the family dynamic music, the father's motives, and one of B's themes. The most important theme of all is the Madeline Mitchell theme. It is a 6'8" meter and brilliantly sounds like her name due to its rhythmic quality. Madeline Mitchell. The theme opens the whole opera. Intentional with its emphasis on rhythm, the Madeline Mitchell theme recurs constantly in new forms throughout the work, both in orchestra and voice. Speaking to Hege's organic impetus to create, the first music he conceived for 3 Decembers was the rhythm of Maddie's name, shown in the top example of the PowerPoint slide. He told me it is the theme that dominates everything because she dominates everything. Yet again, Hege puts character first. According to my analysis, the Madeline Mitchell theme is used 24 times in the hour and a half that the opera spans. I will play the opening of the prelude to solidify its distinct sound. Do we have sound? Oh no, we don't have sound.
It's there.
Oh, there we go. The rhythmic pattern that starts with a dotted 6th to 16th to 8th stays intact. At its first transformation, 4 measures in, the right hand no longer retains the octaves, but rather the interval is reduced to a major 7th, harmonized with the tonic 7th chord, and an added 6th, which intensifies the embedded dissonance. Overall, each iteration of the Madeline Mitchell theme has some sort of transformation, often in the harmony. In a few marked moments, he manipulates the rhythm too. The most striking occurs during the climactic reveal of how the father committed suicide. Hege maintains the melodic content of dropping the minor third, so the theme is still aurally discernible, but takes out the distinctive dotted rhythm. Listen for it in the orchestra, alternating with Madeline's crushing words. The theme underpins the lie she perpetuated. The next major theme I titled Family Dynamic Music, since it happens during the conversational moments and first appears in this scene with Charlie and Bee speaking over the phone, annoyed with the mother's latest self-absorbed Christmas letter. The three sub-themes that make up the family dynamic music occur in the orchestra, while the voices converse in an arioso declamatory style atop it. The aural sound of this conversation music I liken to pointillism in art. It's short, punctuated, and jumpy. First, we hear it in the sibling dialogue subtheme, which the example shows is a specific ascending staccato pattern with repeated major thirds. The next subtheme is the mocking music, as it is often used with the adult children are mocking their mother. It features secundal and quartal harmonies. However, its defining attribute is the rhythmic quality of the 16th note on the beat 5. The playful pizzicato boasts a strong influence from composer Menotti, melodically leaping and bouncing through a large spatial range with staccato articulation. Heggie said he wanted the music of this section to demonstrate familial dysfunction, being playful and fun through its staccato, while the tonally spatial differences generate disparity. Again, this displays his concern for musical representation of connected yet disconnected. This listening example shows all three subthemes moving quickly one into another. I'm gonna start that over because it sort of started halfway through.
Exactly.
There's your sibling dialogue. Mocking music. Playful. Since this music serves the dialogue moments, much like accompagnato recitative, the various themes generate flow through quickly changing topics. The example I will play now is transformed through its new 3/4 faster tempo and lower tonal center, all used to illustrate Charlie's hurried return from shopping in the shoe duet of Act 2. The sibling dialogue you'll hear is further altered as it is a fragment of the original, using the large jump from the bass to the repeated thirds and the subsequent two notes in the pattern over and over. Furthermore, it alternates with the mocking themes and its cluster harmonization. The next three themes exemplify Heggie's economy of means, as they are derivative of one another and highlight the interval of a second. The father theme is heard at the end of Act 1 when the siblings recall happy memories of their father as they stroll on the Golden Gate Bridge. Playing into his instinctual mode of composition, Heggie told me the duet music on the bridge came to him in an afternoon. So baroque in its quality, he called up a friend and said, "Tell me if I stole this or I wrote it." The friend assured him it was indeed his. Simple and evocative of childhood, the theme is first sung by B and continues in variation throughout the scene in both voice and orchestra. I remember a man in a chair. Consider the emphasis on the second. Heggie capitalizes on the upper neighbor. The next melody derives from the father's chair. Notice the I remember figure. I remember. This becomes the core of the lullabyic moon theme that their father once sang to them. The moon sings a song for you every night. The moon theme repeats the father in another guise and captures a rare, sweet moment as the voices of the family unite in an ethereal trio. The moon motive then resurfaces at least 4 more times thereafter. Additionally, the transformations of the father theme occur 5 more times following its original. Finally, another effective way Heggie utilizes seconds is in succession in the truth theme. I titled it this because it first appears as Maddie reveals that their father committed suicide, rather than being randomly hit by a car, which is the story she led them to believe for decades. It sounds like this. Da-da-da-da-da-dum, ba-da-da-da-da-dum. Using both minor and major seconds, it is the incessant repeated notes and the way he uses it as an ostinato that produces an ominous ambiance every time it's voiced in its 7 recurrences. A distinct use of the father's chair and the truth themes occur following the reveal, where Madeline says she couldn't look into their eyes and tell them that their father had killed himself. Immediately, the father's chair theme is heard, sung by the oboe, with a new dissonant harmony and strings, followed by the truth theme. Can't really hear that, can you? There's not any way to turn it up in here, is there? That one's quite soft. It's a very intense moment. Shall we try again? Each of these 3 themes represent different facets of the father through Hege's way of stretching the possibilities of the intervallic second. The last thematic examples represent the daughter B. It seems natural that B is represented in duality through music, the dichotomy between her dreams and her reality. The surreal theme is a sweeping legato melody played in octaves and represents what B wants, a nagging desire to belong. She uses happy memories from her father's passing to daydream. As a 7-year-old, when the tragic accident occurred, she barely remembers her father, yet misses him deeply. This is critical to understanding her character and her music. B has crafted this illusory person in her mind to fixate on. It is as if when her life has let her down, she dreams of the fabricated father and how life would have been different had he lived. The surreal theme is highly fragmented 12 times throughout the score. Seeing as she built her emotional life around this notion, it intensifies the reveal of the theme for B later in the story. B's other side of her personality is musically revealed in her aria. She's an alcoholic and her husband is having an affair. Thus, I named it Her Reality. The example occurs in the middle of her aria. Specifically, listen to the orchestra. Utilized more in the second half of the show, the most apparent transformation of B's reality occurs following the climax of the opera, where Maddie reveals the truth and then pretends like nothing has happened. Both adult children leave in anger, obviously, and this instrumental postlude lets them linger longer, as B's reality theme is played by the piano, and then the violin actually layers the moon theme atop it. This postlude of Act 2 evolves into a dense polyphony as B's reality becomes thicker with chunkier chords in the piano, and the Madeline Mitchell theme then emerges from it. That excerpt exemplifies how Hege takes themes initially distinctive and clear, but then merges them to continue the narrative. That concludes the selected themes I will highlight today. Hege's compositional process of utilizing character-driven themes cultivates a connection with today's modern audience by communicating relatable topics. Since American opera can be difficult for an audience to absorb, Hege has focused on how he can be abundantly clear and take them along for the emotional ride. He does this by exploiting the capabilities of themes and transforming them to suit the evolution of both character and plot. The opera is full of dichotomies, serious balanced with fun, while the darker emotional themes that do find some redemption are relatable to any member of the audience who comes from a dysfunctional family, which is most of them.
Thank you very much for this wonderful presentation and the music and your singing as well. Open for questions. Yes, please.
Wonderful paper. I've only seen the opera once. Now I want to go see it again and see if I can pull that out.
I'm surprised you've seen it. That's wonderful, actually.
I saw it in Louisville when AMS was there.
Oh, great. Okay.
The thing that struck me about the music in the opera, the melodies are beautiful, but there's always this underlying current of disease. And I wondered if you had pulled that out, if that was one of the themes maybe you had discussed with Hagi.
Underlying current of what, sorry?
Of a kind of a disjointed figure underneath it.
Yeah, I mean, he does use a lot of, one thing I spoke on when I gave this I gave a similar talk like this that was 50 minutes back in January in Salt Lake City, and I was able to discuss that he does use cluster chords a lot. That's one of his ways in the transformations a lot of the time. When he's changing the harmony, it's truly just to be sort of a cluster. So I would say probably that would be one of the ways that that's manifesting, is there is a lot of dissonance. But that, to me, is why the themes work really well, is because rather than it just being dissonant and sort of hard, it gives you something to kind of gravitate towards as the listener. But yeah, I would say mainly in the clusters, lots of secundal and lots of quartal harmonies. Quartal, I'm trying to say that very clearly.
Yes.
This has been so much fun to listen to.
Good.
Thank you so
Yes.
much. I was really in agreement with you when you said that it has a film music feel. I totally agree. And I'm basing this question on the production at Dallas Opera. So
Oh, okay.
the answer may have something to do with their staging.
Sure, sure.
actually. But there were moments that were playful. I'm thinking of Shoes.
Yes, the shoe duet.
The shoe duet.
It's the
There
funniest of them.
There are moments that pulled me kind of out of that film experience and put me in a more self-conscious relationship between the singers and the background music that I associate with fun moments in musical theater.
Yeah.
Is that something you've thought about?
Yeah, so actually another part I did discuss, this was initially thought to be conceived as a musical. And then through the 7 years of its conception between multiple parties, became an opera because he is friends with Frederica von Stade, who premiered the Madeline role, and so he actually said, I do write musicals, because a lot of the reviews for this were not very kind, let's just say, which I take issue with because I adore it. Maybe that's, me bringing a bias in, of course. But he did say, I do write musicals just for opera singers. That's one of his direct quotes from my findings. So it is meant to have a very musical theme. It's also a chamber opera. It has 11-piece orchestra, and that's it. So that already makes it a little musical in its setup. And in the original, I don't know how Dallas did it, but Houston Grand and San Francisco, they had 2 platforms at the back of the stage that actually they put the chamber orchestra on. So, and Hagi and Summers were at, Patrick Summers, the conductor, were at the 2 Grands during that. So they actually are sort of on display as well. So I could definitely see why you would be getting that feel from it. Because that all sort of plays into how you experience it, doesn't it?
Thank you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, so this actually kind of comes out of that. I was thinking about this. I was wondering, because I was hearing some of the things with the Madeline Mitchell theme. Are there associations in terms of instrumentation? What kind of, can you speak a little bit to that? Well, first of all, what's the instrumentation for the
So it's 11-piece, and it has 2 grands, and then oboe. It's woodwinds and strings from there.
Okay.
Yeah. I would have to look back again precisely. I believe it does not have brass, but I would have to look again. That's like not coming to my, because he likes to, like in the theme, the father chair, he specifically uses oboe and violin, and he uses those a lot. So to me, it has some of that classical feel in trying to use the voicing and the color and the timbre of woodwinds to like bring a certain emotional quality to it as well. I don't know if that answered your question, but that's
sort of. I didn't know if there were any sort of instrumental associations that he kind of maintained throughout.
Not in the Madeline Mitchell theme that I've noticed, but in the father chair duet, that is huge.
Okay.
Yeah, it's definitely oboe and violin. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Oh, maybe not. Do we have time?
Yes, we do.
Well, I haven't ever seen this opera.
Sure,
But
it's uncommon.
I saw Moby Dick in
yes.
Dallas, and as a Britain scholar, this might be my bias, but when I saw it and when I heard it, I thought, oh, he's answering Billy Budd. He's really talking to Billy Budd.
Sure.
And thinking about this and hearing it, you know, I keep, especially because when I see chamber opera, and when I've known that Heggie has done this, I've thought about Britain's chamber operas,
Sure.
Lucretia,
Yes.
and I've thought of that coloristic world. Even the use of winds suggests to me what Britain had done. And then I thought, well, I wonder if Heggie is sort of on a journey to respond to specifically to a sort of gay legacy of opera, and talking to this sort of inheritance in specific terms through choice of instruments. And here, maybe, it reminds me very much of the familial structure of Owen Wingrave.
Okay.
So, I mean, those are things that maybe are interesting questions.
To go further with, yeah, absolutely. I can't answer to any of those, but that like opens up a new, realm to continue with, because I think that American opera tends to be understudied. So that would be a great way to connect it to British opera that has been very studied. Yeah. Thank you.
Any other, yes?
I meant to say this earlier, but I just want to say I really appreciate your efforts in terms of making this so much more accessible. So this, I have not seen it yet. So, but when I go to see it, I'm like totally down with it.
Great.
Thank
Thank you.
And seeing no questions from our online viewers, let's thank our speaker one more time. The last presenter in this session is Gregory Strawn from Abilene Christian University, who will speak about Byrne, Offenbach, and the sci-fi operetta. Please welcome Dr. Strawn.
In the mid-1950s, a brief biography of Jacques Offenbach appeared entitled Can-Can and Barcarolle. While it myopically confined the life works of a multifaceted composer to a pair of dances, it also represented the extent to which the general public engaged with the composer about 75 years after his death. To the extent that the Can-Can functions as a talisman for Offenbach, in his biography of the composer, Siegfried Krakauer commented on the origin of the dance. It traced its descent back to a dance indulged in by patrons of certain haunts that lay not only in the fringes of the city, but at the fringes of society. This double marginalization provides a meaningful entry point for an examination of the genre as a whole. While fully employing opera's conventions, its locus of lightness, the trivial, and the frivolous as subject matters, that marginalizes it in relation to its high culture. In this way, operetta stands in a parallel position with science fiction, a liminal genre that is more favorably received by the populace than the critic. Indeed, Joseph Kerman sums up this position by noting the instant appeal of works by Addison and Gilbert, making it necessary to keep reformulating the humorless, idealistic position of the value of opera. This essay seeks to explore the questions: what are the critical approaches to marginalization that can be brought to bear in the study of operetta? And can these insights be applied across a spectrum of the genre? An immediate connection provides a compelling beginning point, the fact that modern science fiction and operetta share the same point of origin, the Paris of Second Empire France, where Jules Verne and Jacques Offenbach reached their greatest influence. In 1875, Offenbach faced a crossroads. He had not had a major success since Robinson Crusoe premiered at the Opéra Comique in 1867. In the 8 intervening years, more works failed than succeeded, and what financial stability he did achieve was through reworkings of past triumphs, a slightly revised remount of La Péricole, one of La Vie Parisienne, and 2 of Orphée aux Enfers, separated by 6 months in 1874. The success of the final remount of Orphée, with its emphasis on spectacle, led to a disastrous and no expense spared offering of La Haine, a play by Victorien Sardou, for which Offenbach wrote extensive incidental music. The play included a cathedral scene, complete with a Cavalier-Cole organ installed into the Gaîté, a ruined castle, numerous battle scenes, and a host of 535 supernumeraries, leading one critic to note that the crowd was the principal character. Offenbach was bankrupt, and his new works were beginning to be seen as relics of a bygone era. Ludovic Alavé, part of the team that wrote and created La Vie Parisienne, Le Grand Duchesse, and La Péricole, wrote of their current collaboration, Offenbach, Melach, and I are exhausted. That is the truth. We have done too much. We've said all there is to say about the choruses, entrance, exits, processions, partings. Bold and imaginative ideas disappear as we get older, and our genre, more than any other, needs daring and fantasy. I think we now know our medium very well, but that has its disadvantages. It makes us timid and careful. We have lost the boldness of inexperience. The trio would never collaborate again. But Offenbach did explore the notion of fantasy in his next work, 1875's La Voyage de la Lune, an opéra féerie based on a story by Jules Verne. La Voyage ran for more than 150 performances, providing a much-needed financial boost. The press was initially interested in the lunar facade erected on the front of the Gaîté. Le Figaro reported, large crowds gathered to examine the magnificent relief illuminated by reflecting mirrors and on which can be seen volcanoes, mountains, plains, and oceans that can be seen using a telescope. The observatory has nothing so complete. As the performances began, however, attention turned to Le Grand Machine, the giant cannon that hurled visitors to the moon by means of a bullet-shaped projectile. Gustave Lafargue, writing in Le Figaro, compared it to the famous monster gun being sent to the Philadelphia exposition by the Prussian manufacturers Friedrich and Alfred Krupp. Their use of steel in the casting process allowed for considerably larger sizes than the old brass bores of the Napoleonic era. Still, Lafargue offers this chastisement to the Krupp gun: behave yourself, when compared to the gun on stage at the Gaîté. The set piece dominated the first act and served as the inspiration for the same scene in Georges Méliès's short film from 1902, a mere 27 years after the Offenbach production. The cannon is, of course, a gimmick. It's part MacGuffin and part Deus ex machina. It serves here, quite literally, to advance characters from one setting, the Earth, to another, the Moon. It is also a clear manifestation of what the literary critic Darko Suvin called the novum in science fiction, a plausible scientific advancement that is recognized by the reader or audience, through its explicit or technical workings, are not known. Indeed, the workings cannot be fully known, or it's not a future-oriented advancement. One simply accepts it and anticipates it as possible. Suvin further notes the novum should function with narrative dominance throughout the work in order to achieve maximum efficacy. For Suvin, the prototype genre of science fiction is the utopian story, especially one that entails travel to another place. Thomas More and Francis Bacon represent the earliest flourishings, while Robinson Crusoe and Gulliver's Travels represent trailheads of the genre, followed by works such as Erewhon, Looking Backward, and News from Nowhere. The idea of utopia is essential to the notion of possibility inherent in the novum, even if that possibility is presented in the negative, as it is the case for post-apocalyptic dystopian stories. Suvin argues, utopia is a formal inversion of significant and salient aspects of the author's world, which has as its purpose or telos the recognition that the author and the reader truly live in an axiologically inverted world. So what then might these inverted values be? The ephemeral in place of the permanent, the trivial in lieu of the substantial, indulgence versus moderation. These characteristics are tantalizingly close to those of operetta. Seuvin's work on utopias and the novum is crystallized in his 1979 book, The Metamorphoses of Science Fiction. And then 2 decades later, he interrogated that idea that the novum defines the genre of science fiction, noting that it does not supply justification, it demands justification. Where is the progress progressing to? In the case of La Voyage, the progression originates as a moment of refusal. Prince Caprice, whose birthday prompted the transfer of the throne from his father, refuses to accept the crown, seeking exotic travel adventures instead, and the rising moon provides just the right inspiration. The story can also be read as a critique of the monarchy and the existential question that plagues all such institutions: who will succeed the king? The terrestrial monarch, King Vlan, cannot convince his son to assume the throne, while the lunar monarch, currently King Cosmos, is chosen by measuring the citizens' weight and choosing the heaviest person to rule. Indeed, in a thinly veiled reference to Napoleon III, King Vlan responds to the question of succession, noting that his son's royal blood will naturally predispose him to the throne. He ends his discourse with the question, "Besides, have I not had the crown restored?" The height of satiric commentary comes at the moment of departure when King Vlad opines, "I was never so popular before." Indeed, the French correspondent for the Times reported, "All the monarchical doctrines of France are summarized in this saying and scene. Real enthusiasm for kings is only felt when they leave." While an analysis of political context and allusions provides significant insight into the reception of Second Empire operetta, it is important to recognize that, as Krakauer succinctly observes, operetta's real home was not among mankind at all. It oscillated between a lost and promised paradise. Carolyn Abate refines this observation, recognizing that we least grasp the wonder of operetta when, like progressive Republicans, we take it as a sociological seismograph tethered to contemporary contexts. Abate offers the very compelling insight of ethical frivolity as the primary agency of operetta. Krakauer's insight, however, opens the possibility of locating operetta in a continuum where one anchor point is clearly defined. The promised paradise represents a kind of utopia. Graham Gillick suggests that for Krakauer, Offenbach's music possessed a utopian moment or promise that was irreconcilable with the frivolity, complacency, and self-deception of imperial Paris. What then can be made of Krakauer's lost paradise? Paul Ricoeur develops a continuum wherein he recognizes that the only possibility for judgment is one that contrasts ideology with utopia. For it is only the basis of utopia, the viewpoint of the ideal, that we can engage in critique. With his emphasis on the ideal as the vantage point, Ricoeur is presenting a hermeneutic of optimism. Ricoeur's optimism underscores his theory of hermeneutics in general, especially as applied to texts that offer moral instruction, myths and scriptures. He posits a threefold structure where the reader moves from a first naivete, accepting myths and scripture on their face as literally true, to a critical desert where questions of cause and purpose and rationale mark the reader's engagement with the text, to a second naivete where texts are re-examined through the lens of the critical method, but with a willingness to be shaped and formed by those texts. How then might the idea of a second naivete be applied to the study of operetta? It seems that the first naivete is the most basic operatic convention, sung narrative. As listeners, we suspend our disbelief in the otherworldliness of storytelling through song as soon as the orchestra begins. Much has been made of those numinous moments where the accompaniment breaks through this suspension and is heard both by the audience and character as immanent and real. Indeed, when critics analyze the symbolism or function of these moments or perform other kinds of analyses, they enter Ricoeur's critical desert, leaving behind the simplicity of the sung story to interrogate matters of form or genre or compositional technique. Occasionally, critics move to a second naivete, when noting, usually at the end of their critical essay, the power opera has to move or inspire. Operetta, however, demands this move occur because there's so much less music compared with an opera production. Thus, each of the musical moments carries both the rhetorical freight of advancing the story and the emotional freight of creating a highly memorable moment. Operetta is a genre of highlights, and it is the immediate, imminent function of such music to draw listeners into the sound world as a ready and willing participant, ready to be moved, ready to be entertained, ready to be transfixed by the rubato-laden climax or the infernal gallop of the finale. The function of operetta as a genre of highlights is manifest in the ways it has been commoditized in the mass market record distribution. And looking at 3 meta-labeled recording outlets here, Amazon, Spotify, and iTunes, for every complete operetta album offered, there were several times more highlight albums available. About 3.7 times on Amazon, 5.6 on Spotify, 3.9 on iTunes. And I just gathered this data by searching the term operetta and opera at each of those sites. Interestingly, on Amazon, you were about 3.5 more times likely to find a complete opera recording compared to a highlight album. This further solidifies operetta's place as a genre of highlights. The intersection of the 3 ideas under investigation here, operetta's construction through highlights, the application of the idea of naivete, and the work of novum in storytelling come into sharp focus and full circle when we examine Offenbach's 1877 Dr. Ox. Fresh from his American tour, Offenbach again turned to a story by Jules Verne to help reestablish a perch in the public's interest. The story centers on the goings-on in an ultra-somnolent village where courtships last a decade, chess games are measured in years, and the town's leadership serve in appointments of 70 years or more. The titular Dr. Ox visits and offers to replace the gas in the street lamps with his special creation, oxyhydric gas, which he posits will help speed things up to a normal tempo. It does, hilarity ensues, and couples are enlivened to swap lovers from their original pairings. A bohemian troupe is welcomed and asked to perform at the town festival. Their leader is Praskovia, who is left at the altar by the good doctor. Determined to expose him as a fraud, Praskovia develops a plan to steal the gas that's foiled when the holding tank explodes, returning everybody to their lugubrious states. This prompts the final line delivered by Dr. Ox to the audience. Between you and me, everything we saw in this little town, we could have seen anywhere. The novum is easily identifiable, the function and the effect of releasing concentrated oxygen into the town's atmosphere. Verne's story details more of its background of the processing, but the effect is the same, the creation of energy, vitality, and alacrity among those who breathe it. More than a simple talisman, like the cannon in La Voyage, here the novum works throughout the story, providing a convincing denouement that returns the characters to their antediluvian state, at least before the flood of oxygen. Indeed, the return to this state itself is the recapture of naivete, the entrance into a second naivete. While the characters are reset into their prior mode of engagement, they return to their initial pairings, for instance, the audience recognizes the power of their oxygenated experience to offer new perspectives to these modes. What was a long-standing marriage between the mayor and his wife is interrupted when, under the influence of the oxygen, the mayor proposes to his maid. After becoming clear-headed, the mayor and his wife resume their relationship. The audience is left to ponder the effects of such a return. Will the characters remember their infidelities? Will such a memory create fractures destined to expand? Can one ever really return to a prior state once the specter of infidelity has been introduced? Offenbach allays these concerns by recapitulating the placid chorus first used when the citizens inhaled a sample of the doctor's gas, in effect closing the loop of concerns with music that is familiar and reassuring. To be sure, what originally was, "Ah, what ecstasy, words cannot describe what I am feeling," has become, "Ah, what wonder, it seems that I am dreaming." Fortunately, Offenbach swerves away from the hoary trope, "It was all just a dream," by including the moral delivered by Dr. Ox. Far from being a lieto fine and a I'm not sure how operetta has a more happier ending than what it's giving. The moral serves to locate the story in a fairy tale-like world. Offenbach used a similar device at the end of La Grande Duchesse and Orphée. In the latter, Pluto and Jupiter argue over how to end the story, and Pluto notes, that's not how it happened in the original, and Jupiter says, we'll just have to tell it again my way. And then the Grand Duchess interrupts the finale to declare, it's unexpected, but it's moral, so ends the comedy. As in La Grande Duchesse, Dr. Ox uses familiar music to set the moral of the story. Here, though, it's the most recognized tune in the show, the Bohemian melody with its expanding contrary motion from a 7th to a 9th to an 11th. The tune was first sung by Praskovia. The character added to the Verne story as a vehicle for the dedicatee Anna Judique. The press noted how her addition was happily inspired and harmonized well with the general effervescence of the story. But the couplet that forms her Bohemian melody was singled out as destined to survive the 100 presentations promised to Ox. That Offenbach would revisit this signature show tune is not surprising. That he would link it to the moral is particularly felicitous and indicates his true genius at creating a compelling structure to deliver the story. Dr. Ox represents the integration of novum and naivete. In surveying the utopian literature that forms the basis of science fiction, Darko Suvin acknowledges a definition posed by Raymond Rouet, the French philosopher of the mid-20th century, whose works brought together philosophy and science. Utopia is a game, but a serious game. The utopian author envisages the other possibilities of nature, but he does not let go of the notion of nature. Operetta has a parallel function, imagining many possible realities of the naive, but not letting go of the notion of naivete. The connection between the perfect states of nature and naivete was first recognized by Friedrich Schiller in his essay on naive and sentimental poetry from 1795. Engaging those primal, authentic feelings arrived at through seeing a flower, or hearing a brook, or smelling a mossy stone, is the essence of naivete. He notes that what we were and what we should once again become. The return to original state of nature is parallel to the second naivete Ricoeur describes in his hermeneutic of optimism. It is an informed return shaped by experiences, expectations, denials, and resolutions. It is a kind of prodigality, an apt metaphor for operetta and Ricoeur, denoting reckless extravagance, excess, and abandon, while also connoting a return, as conveyed in Christ's parallel of the prodigal son. The embracing of second naivete does not limit interpretability, whether routine or ribald. Neither does it suggest an aping of original production designs or slavish adherence to authorial intent. It functions at the level of the work itself, recognizing the prodigality of characters and, by extension, of the desire of the audience who also long for a return. In the case of the citizens in Dr. Ox, the return is to an original position. In La Voyage, it is a desire for a literal terra firma. But whether it's coming home from the land of smiles, or the ball in Savoy, or a stay at the White Horse Inn, operetta is marked by prodigality and the desire to embrace a second naivete. Offenbach understood this. In listing the areas of study for the young prince in La Voyage, the studies that would lead to his successful assumption of the throne, Professor Microscope includes lightness, youthfulness, trivia, prodigality, truly the great ideas. Indeed they are, and worthy of our study. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. We are open for questions.
Thank you, Greg. I so appreciate, I've been writing these all over the place, some of these fabulous ideas. And I was wondering if you could address, or if you have given any thought to, so we have those three, the naivete and then the return to naivete. And in this case, it was kind of, it was by accident. It wasn't a deliberate choice. But because there's always these utopia. I mean, you see it in television with, I don't know, with like Mormons going out and then coming back, and I can't remember the one where there's the not Quakers.
The Rumspringa.
What's that?
The Rumspringa.
Yeah, this idea where you have this naivete, this simplicity, maybe, and maybe I'm doing an artificial conflation of those two ideas, but then there's a deliberate not analysis, but examination of it in its absence, right? Sure. Sending them out of the utopia, and then the deliberate return to that. You know, having experienced everything and realizing that utopia is really the best thing. Right. Do you see any sense of that in narratives?
I think that's a terrific point, and I'm struck by the frequency with which operetta characters do dumb things every production, right? I mean, it's the same dumb thing every time, obviously. They never seem to learn from their mistakes, and I think that may work at the level of the narrative, but then I think it opens up a question: what is the reception of that? What really is the audience's takeaway from this? And so I think there's a dichotomy to explore there that's not artificial. I think it really exists. But I think you're right to pose the limit of the narrative of being able to do that. I think it's our responsibility as the viewer and the audience to engage that. It's a great point.
Other questions? Yes.
I mean, I know nothing about Offenbach, so thank you very much. I do have a question. I mean, we associate Offenbach with Second Empire.
Sure.
But this is after the Commune.
True.
So is there any sort of change in message or change in reception because of that experience?
Undoubtedly. I think the notion of him kind of poking fun at the notion of transferability of the throne becomes a slightly more politicized moment later. He clearly seems to be trying to distance himself and be the consummate businessman, and politics is politics, and I could engage some funny political comment, but I'm not going to be particularly at the cutting edge of incisive and witty and cultural in that respect. So the question of exactly where he finds himself at the end of his life, I think, is more an existential question of viability and financial success. He is really interested in the vehicles that will promote that. And of course, then we get to the very end of his life and we get the greatest work of all, Hoffmann. So, but we do have Offenbach scholars in the room.
Any other question, suggestion? I see a question online from Virginia Wheelton. She is asking, could you speak to how you see this as challenging or engaging with earlier forms of musical utopianism or music associated with utopian movements in Paris, thinking specifically of Saint-Simonians?
Yeah, and that's a good question that I haven't explored yet, and I think the notion of music as a vehicle for utopia might be another topic in and of itself. So I appreciate that question. It's one that has sort of rattled around, but I haven't taken the time to explore it. I'm trying really hard just to get the framework of the idea working and kind of push through a couple of different examples to make sure that when I've tested the idea, it still holds some measure of truth and accuracy. So I don't know if it works for Gotthardammerung, for instance. I'm not sure that it would.
Any other comment?
Quick comment.
Yes, please.
I was just wondering to what extent some of these ideas would apply to Gilbert and Sullivan.
Sure. Well, of course, then you've got actual utopia mentioned. So I was at an operetta conference earlier this year and presented a version of this, and that was one of the takeaways there. And so that's another literature that I really haven't worked on. I do think that the notion of more direct political commentary is part and parcel of what Gilbert and Sullivan were doing. And I don't see that as much on the side with Offenbach. So I'm wondering if political commentary and the notion of the government as the ideal position is more appropriate in certain genres or even subgenres than others. And so I'm wondering if the continent has a distaste for that, and it may be the difference between parliamentary and representative democracies and monarchies. So I think that's worth exploring.
Sorry, and even in England, the expectation that there's going to be some sort of reference or subtext or whatever.
And I get it, right? I mean, it's are you in on the joke?
Anything else? Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me just, or did you want to do
No,
that?
no, go ahead.
Remind our viewers online and all of you here that we will now go to music biz sessions, which we will not live stream. The live stream will be back at 12:40 with 2 papers. And any other announcements?
Just, there's a drum circle that should have started a couple of minutes ago that we can join at any time. I don't think it's outside. I think it's going to be in that main room. There are refreshments and lots of vendors set up in the Riverwalk room if you want to check that out. At 11:40, there are the 2 music biz sessions. Especially, I thought the Roots of San Antonio's music would be relevant, but also selling tickets or ticket sales. And then we're back here at 12:40. And I'm going to go over to Pico de Gallo during the break. If you haven't filled out a form yet and you want to, let me know. I'm sure they will accommodate us if we come at the last minute. I don't think it's going to be that much of a problem, but I think it's nice to give them as much warning as possible. Thank you.
In fact, if I may add, it has been sort of become a little tradition that if there are students who cannot afford the more than usual, I mean, more pricey than usual lunch, we may find a sponsor. So if you can let us know, we'll buy you lunch. Okay. Thank you, Drew.
Thank you.